G'day. Oscar Piastri wins his first F1 feature race. It should have been a momentous occasion. Instead, it turned out to be a nightmare. McLaren let both of their drivers down yesterday in the Hungarian Grand Prix. What happened? Well, on lap 45, with Oscar leading, the team made the call to pit Lando, and then Oscar came in 2 laps later. That resulted in Oscar losing his lead to his teammate. That's when the drama started. The pit wall asked Lando to give the lead back to Oscar. Lando pushed back. There was radio chatter between the pit wall and both drivers before Lando finally yielded a couple of laps from home. But by that stage, a lot of the damage had been done. McLaren fans were divided. Some were angry that he had to give back his lead, others angry that he didn't do it immediately. Oscar was the meat in the sandwich. Earlier in the day they had a team meeting and it was agreed that if this scenario played out, the lead would be given back. But obviously if you're facing your second career win, it's a tough thing. But he did give his word and he did give up the lead. Oscar goes on to win, but by then the luster had worn off. On the podium, I was looking to see whether Lando would shun his teammate, because obviously he would have felt aggrieved, and while he was quick to thump his bottle of bubbly on the podium, he completely bypassed Oscar and went for the team representative. Now you have to remember that Oscar had already apologised to his crew on the team radio for winning in that style. This wasn't a race win for him, this was his first race win, and he deserved to celebrate it with enthusiasm and excitement. He was robbed of that opportunity, and the team has come out looking very poor in all of this. I went to the McLaren engineering motorhome post-race and found Team Principal Andrea Stella addressing a large contingent of media from the steps, and he was copping some tough questions. And did you see Nico Rosberg give him some very frank advice in their on-screen interview? Nico was up front. He said, you need to give very clear, strong instructions from the pit wall to those drivers. And to his credit, he accepted that advice, because I think you have to agree that a team principal who's just got himself a 1-2 result in a Grand Prix, and that hasn't happened, has it, for some time, should be celebrating, not fending off tough questions and advice from others in the industry. And going back to the podium, Lando should have been sharing that podium glory with Oscar, and Oscar certainly deserved to feel on top of the world, instead of feeling like a chump. Now, I know that Lando approached Oscar while Oscar was still in his car in Parc Ferme, and at that time I thought, well, that's a good sign, because I thought he might have completely snubbed him. But the whole post-race mood was nothing like what it should have been. Oscar did head to his crew, who were right next to me, and thank them for their efforts. And was I expecting Oscar to jump into his crew's arms like Lando did in Miami? Well, yeah, but at the time, I didn't know what I know now, having heard a lot of team radio and spoken to a lot of people. So now I understand why that didn't happen. I also don't think that his managers, Anne and Mark Webber, were there on Sunday. They were there earlier in the week, and I didn't spot either of his parents. So really, he had a few people outside the team to celebrate with. I was also keen to see how Lando would react in Parc Ferme. He did go over and thank a lot of his crew around the car, and then he came over to the crew next to me, and I really think this picture here sums up his emotion. I don't know if that's a tear in his eye, but certainly he wasn't happy on coming second. In general, I think Lando, Oscar, Andrea, and many of the team were just left on a downer after a 1-2 result. And as strange as it sounds, I don't think Oscar's going to look back at this victory with much joy at all. Anyway, moving on to post-podium, it was off to the cool-down room, and then about 15 minutes later, the drivers were escorted out to the TV media pen. Then about 5:42, it was off to the press conference. Well, it was a little bit earlier for Lando and Lewis, because they'd answered their questions in the media pen well earlier than Oscar. And when Lewis came in, he did say to Lando, oh, I've got to go up to the stewards. Max is claiming this, and they had a bit of a joke about it, that the gist of it was that's a bit rich coming from Max Verstappen. And I'll get to Max a little bit later in this video. But because of that steward's inquiry, Lewis had to leave the press conference early, which left just the 2 McLaren drivers facing questions. And thereafter, it was down to a celebration in pit lane. And the McLaren celebration strike me as a bit of an anti-climax, because it's pretty much just a photo shoot, whereas if you do a Red Bull or a Mercedes, when they win their races, there's spraying of stuff and pandemonium erupts afterwards. But at that time, Oscar was still covered in champagne from the podium. So he's headed out the back of the McLaren hospitality suite to jump in this bath. And I didn't realise he was out there, but then I noticed his security guard and one of his PR people were moving this rolling board, shielding something. And then sure enough, out from behind that comes a towel-wrapped Oscar Piastri. And I'd like to say that I hung around long enough to say goodbye to him as he left shortly thereafter, but I didn't. I had to go and do something else, and when I came back, was only gone 3 minutes. I'd missed him. I had noticed that a lot of the TV networks in Australia this morning were all excited about Oscar's win and even crossing down to a go-kart track that he spent much of his youth at in Victoria, where there is a straight called Piastri Straight. And being such an exciting day for Australians, I must admit I did have a tear in my eye singing our national anthem. I hunted around the back to see how many Aussies I could find that work in Formula One. I found Carl Reindler, he is the medical car driver. Josh Cruz from Melbourne, who works at Ferrari. This is Kylie from Perth. She's Lewis's trainer. This is Oscar's trainer, Kim Keedle from Melbourne. And these three Aussies are paddock guests. Now let's move on to Max Verstappen, because he had a shit of a day, didn't he? And if you have listened to any of the radio between him and his team, it wasn't pleasant. And I overheard one of his crew saying that he and his race engineer really have to sit down and sort things out, because it's not sounding terribly good. And when he was questioned by a couple of my friends, some Dutch reporters, about some comments that he'd received on social media about his angry radio messages, he said, well, they can just f*** off. So that's further escalated things. I'm not sure whether this luncheon atop the Red Bull Hospitality Suite would have had any inkling that things were going to turn out so bad. Who's at this lunch? Well, you've got Christian Horner here, Helmut Marko, the 51% owner of Red Bull, Chileo Uvidea, Oliver Mintzlaff, the CEO of Red Bull GmbH out of Austria. They own 49%, and the company's lawyer with his back to us. Now, you probably thought that Sainz and Perez finished 6th and 7th, respectively, in yesterday's race. Well, according to Apex GP F1, the official Instagram page for the Apex team, which is a fictitious 11th team filming at F1 races, they finished 6th and 7th. And I can tell you there was a lot of filming going on in Parc Fermé behind the main action. I just happened to look up and see this monstrous camera above all the action. Then backwards and forwards, the drivers were getting ready to film scenes with Brad and Damson after the race. But I must admit, I haven't looked at that Instagram page for a heck of a long time. So I realise now that they're actually building a persona for the team online, as if indeed they were racing each race. And in fact, some of these photos are mine, which is nice to see. Anyway, they'll be at Spa come next weekend, and they're going to a couple of other races throughout this year. Let me go on to other things that I observed over the weekend. You might remember we had that big storm Wednesday night that absolutely smashed the screen that was at the entry to pit lane. Well, look at this. They actually replaced it by race day, and with a much bigger screen. So that was quick work on the part of F1. Some of you asking whether Cloud Strike's dramas, which is actually a sponsor of Mercedes, caused any drama in pit lane. The only thing I was told about was some screens that went black on the pit wall for Mercedes, but that was sorted out in reasonably quick time. Oh, and I was told that some drama at Budapest airport with flights not being able to land or take off for some period of time. If you were one of those people, I'd be interested in your comments below. Other news, Kimi Antonelli, who is earmarked as a Mercedes driver or perhaps Williams next year or the year after, he had a win in F2, and there was much excitement down there in Parc Fermé for him and up on the podium. And afterwards I caught one of the race engineers at Prema having a very emotional moment downstairs, seeing young Kimi up on the top step of the podium. Is there an update to the Lando Norris Viva España sign issue? Well, no, but I was actually in the car park when Lando arrived on Sunday morning. He got out of the back seat of the car at exactly the same time that Carlos Sainz was arriving, and the pair, as you probably realised from my video the other day, are parked next to each other. So as Carlos reversed into his park, Lando took a position behind his car and provided some resistance. It was all laughed off. And what was Carlos's expression like? Well, I couldn't get that because I was on the wrong side of the car for that. Many of you will know that I'm not terribly mechanically minded or have any idea much about the cars at all, but I did happen to notice the difference between Sergio Perez's car and Max Verstappen. And look, it is marked in terms of the side of the car. But if you watch the race, you would have heard Max complain on numerous occasions that his car, which is the one that's had these upgrades, was not performing anywhere near its peak and turned out to be quite frustrating for the Dutch driver. Did we have any celebrities at the track? Well, I didn't see anyone of any note, really. I struggled to find any celebrity status. We did have Niki Lauda's son, Lucas Lauda, with us. Wives and girlfriends? I glimpsed Nico's wife, Sunny. I believe Lance was there with his girlfriend Mary Lou Beringer. George Russell had his girlfriend Carmen with him. And initially when I saw this woman, whose first name is Ramona, I thought this was Kika, Pierre's girlfriend. And I wasn't the first to think that. She is a Romanian TV personality. And we had a two-time World Championship fencer. If you have a look now at the Constructors' Championship table, Red Bull still at the top, but prior to this race, they were up by 78 points over McLaren. But this race, McLaren scored 43, Red Bull 16, so the net was 27 points. And now they are just 51 points behind the leaders. Two more races like this would see McLaren jump Red Bull for the Constructors' Championship. And in terms of prize money for that, it's reputed to be around $140 million US. And that's a pretty handy first prize. I thought Perez did well coming from 16th to 7th, but ideally the team did not want him starting in 16th. And he'll be under, once again, considerable pressure going into the next race at Spa, which is the final race before our summer break. For me, it's home to a winter in Perth, which is probably not that different to a summer in England. Please give this a like and subscribe. And for these two new F1 photo books, go to kimellman.com. Thanks for watching and stay passionate. And the company's lawyer with his back to us. Off.